Mara, September 14, 2026. My name is Mara Osei, and I am 24 years old, and I am a postgraduate student in architectural history at the University of Edinburgh, and I am staying alone in Yomiten Hall, Northumberland, for a period of 8 weeks while I complete the survey component of my doctoral thesis, which is concerned with the incorporation of Japanese aesthetic elements into Victorian domestic architecture in the north of England between 1870 and 1900. I am telling you this because I want the record to be clear from the beginning about who I am and what I am doing here, and what I was not looking for when I found it. I arrived on the 9th of September with my laptop and my measuring equipment, and my archive access permissions and my copy of the National Trust survey of the property, which runs to 207 pages, and which I have read 3 times, and which is thorough and accurate in everything it covers, and which does not mention the room. Yomiten Hall was built in 1854 by a man named Arthur Pemberton, who had spent 12 years in Japan as an agent of a trading company, who had returned to England in 1853 with money, with a Japanese wife who died in the crossing, and with a collection of Japanese art and objects of a scale and significance that he neither fully catalogued nor fully understood. He built the house on the Northumberland moorland because the land was cheap, and the remoteness suited a man who was not, by all accounts, easy to be near. He planted Japanese maples and bamboo along the eastern aspect of the formal garden, which are still there in 2026, and which are the most substantial Japanese plantings in the north of England, according to the horticultural survey the Trust did in 2019. He filled the house with his collection. He died in 1889, unmarried after his wife's death, having spent 35 years in the house with the collection, and with whatever the collection had made of him, which the contemporary accounts suggest was not a good thing. The house passed through 3 owners between 1889 and 1978, when it was given to the National Trust along with its contents, most of which are still here. The Trust has done the rooms up beautifully, the Japonisme interiors restored to their 1880s appearance, the Japanese objects correctly identified and labeled, the Victorian furniture cleaned and preserved, the parquet floors refinished, the garden maintained. It is an excellent example of Victorian Japonisme domestic architecture and a genuinely significant collection. It is also, and I began to understand this in the first week, and I have been unable to stop understanding it since, a house that does not match its plans. I mean this precisely and literally. The floor plan in the Trust's survey, cross-referenced with the original architect's drawings in the Northumberland archives, does not correspond to the interior dimensions I have been measuring. The discrepancy is small. We are talking about perhaps 8 to 12 feet of linear space distributed across the upper floor's western wing, but it is not an error. I have measured 3 times. I have mapped the rooms I can access against the plan. There is space in the western wing that is not accounted for by any room on any plan I have been able to find. I found the messages on September the 12th, 3 days after my arrival. I was measuring the western corridor on the upper floor, working systematically from the stairhead toward the end of the corridor, when I noticed that the paneling on the north wall of the corridor, at the point where the corridor ends in a blank wall, had a quality of resonance when I knocked on it that was different from the paneling I had been knocking on for the preceding 30 feet. Not hollow exactly, different. The sound of a wall that has more on the other side of it than another wall. I ran my hands along the panel seams as you do. I have been doing this for 2 years of practical survey work, and I know the difference between a decorative panel seam and a structural one. And I know that Victorian houses sometimes have things behind their decorative paneling that the decorative paneling was installed to conceal. Modifications, repairs, passages that were built and then abandoned, all the ordinary architectural history of a large house that has been through several owners and several sets of priorities. The seam I found was a structural one. It ran from floor to ceiling, and it had, at a height of approximately shoulder level, a resistance that you could feel if you pressed firmly. Not a latch, not a catch, but a point of pivot, a place where the panel was attached at the top and the bottom but was free to move at the center. The panel swung inward when I pushed. Behind it was a space approximately 4 feet deep, in the wall itself, which was deeper than the wall should have been based on the exterior measurements. Which is to say that this space was cutting into a part of the wall that should, from the outside, have been solid stone, and which had instead been left hollow from the interior. The space was cold and dark and smelled of old paper and something else, something I will come back to, something I am still trying to describe accurately. Not unpleasant, old, specific, like the smell of a temple, which is something I know from one visit to Japan with my family when I was 16. The specific smell of incense that has been burned in a space for a very long time and has left itself in the stone. Inside the space, at the level of the floor, was a lacquer box. The lacquer was black with red interior detailing, in a style that I recognized as Japanese from the Meiji period, smaller than a shoebox but heavier than it looked, because lacquer work of this quality is dense. It was shut but not locked. I opened it. Inside the box were documents, paper folded in the Japanese manner, paper of a quality that was not Victorian, not English-made paper, too thin, too strong with a different texture. Japanese paper, written on in English, in a hand that was not English. The letter forms correct, but the spacing and the pressure of the pen slightly different from an English-trained hand, slightly more deliberate, in the way that handwriting is deliberate when the language is not your first. The first line of the first document read, "I know you will find this because the house will bring you here." It brought me. It brings everyone who comes to this corridor and knows what to look for in a wall. I do not know when you are reading this. I am writing it in the autumn of 1887, and I do not know when you will come. I hope it is not too long. I hope someone comes before the room does what it is trying to do. Her name was Keiko Fujiwara. I know this because she told me, 3 pages into the first document, with the specific formal quality of a woman introducing herself in writing in a second language, giving her name and her father's name and her family's province and the year of her birth. She was 19 years old in 1887. She was the daughter of a former samurai family of the Satsuma domain, which had been among the most significant domains in Japan, before the Meiji Restoration had abolished the domain system, and its samurai class, which had left Keiko's father wealthy in the particular way of a man whose status had been abolished, but whose land and resources had not. He had sent Keiko to England in 1886. In the company of a diplomatic household she was nominally attached to, with the stated purpose of having her educated in English language and English customs, and the unstated purpose of having her marry an Englishman of sufficient means, and standing to be worth marrying, which was a calculation that Keiko describes in the documents with the precise, unsentimental clarity of someone who understands the calculation perfectly, and has no particular objection to it in principle. What she objected to was Yomiten Hall. What she objected to, specifically and with increasing urgency across the 7 documents in the lacquer box, was what was in the room at the end of the western corridor. I am going to give you Keiko's words. I have transcribed all 7 documents into my laptop, and I am going to give you her words, as she wrote them, in the order she wrote them, interspersed with my own account of what I have found here in 2026, because the 2 accounts need to be read together. She knew this. She wrote the documents to be found alongside whatever was found in the house by whoever found them. They are designed to be read alongside something else, the way a caption is designed to be read alongside an image. I am the image she was writing the caption for. I am beginning to understand what that means. Keiko, 14th October, 1887. My name is Fujiwara Keiko. My father is Fujiwara Haruto of Kagashima Prefecture, formerly of the Satsuma domain. I was born in the 21st year of the Ansei period, which you may translate as 1858. I am writing in English because the person who finds this will need to be able to read it, and English is the language of this house. I am writing with some difficulty in English because, although I have studied English since I was 14 years old, the ease of it is not yet complete, and I ask you to read past the places where I have not found the right word, because I have tried to use the right words and I have not always succeeded, but the meaning is right even where the word is approximate. I arrived at Yomiten Hall in June of 1886 as a guest of Mr. Arthur Pemberton, who had known my father through the trading company in Kagoshima in the 1860s, and who had written to him in 1885 with the proposal that I come to Northumberland as part of a small arrangement of Japanese students being placed with English families for the purpose of cultural education. This arrangement was formal and legitimate. There were 2 other young women from Japan in similar arrangements in the north of England at the same time, and we wrote letters to each other across the first year. I have not written to either of them about what I am writing to you about. I have not written to my father about it either. I am writing to you, unknown person, because you are the right person to tell, and because the house will eventually produce the right person, the way the house produces everything it needs. I have been at Yomiten Hall for 16 months. In the first 3 months, I was busy with the practical business of learning to live in an English house, which is very different from living in a Japanese house, and with the formal business of the arrangement, which required me to be educated in English domestic customs, and to attend church with Mr. Pemberton, and to participate in the social occasions of the county, which were pleasant enough, and which gave me a reasonable picture of what an English marriage would look like, which is what I was here for. I was not unhappy. Mr. Pemberton was a strange man, solitary, obsessive about his collection, most comfortable when left to move through the house cataloging or rearranging, but not unkind. I began to notice the western corridor in September of 1886, 3 months after my arrival. I noticed it because of the cold. The upper floor of the western wing is colder than any other part of the house, in a way that the season and the aspect do not adequately explain. It is cold in September, which is not yet the cold of the Northumberland winter. It is cold in a specific and local way, concentrated in the final 30 feet of the corridor where the paneling is. I mentioned the cold to Mr. Pemberton, and he said it was the stone and the north-facing aspect, and he moved past the subject in the particular way he had of moving past subjects that touched on things he did not wish to discuss, which was a way I had learned to recognize. He moved past many subjects in that way when I came near the things he did not wish to discuss. The western wing, the catalog, which he kept in a locked study and had never shown me, the question of what was in the rooms at the top of the house that were always locked. He was not secretive in a hostile sense. He was secretive in the way of someone who has a very complicated private relationship with a thing and does not wish the complication to be visible. I am samurai class, by birth and by training. I know the face of a man with a complicated private relationship with something dangerous. We had those men in the Satsuma domain. There is a particular quality to the relationship, the combination of devotion and unease, the way they cannot stay away from the thing and cannot rest when they are near it. Mr. Pemberton had that quality, and the thing he had it about was in the western wing. I understood this by October of 1886, 14 months before I am writing this, and I spent the 14 months since trying to understand the thing itself. I know what it is now. I will tell you what I know, and I will tell you what I believe, and I will try to be careful about which is which. What I know, it is a Kagami. It is a bronze ritual mirror, approximately 2 feet across, circular, made in Japan in a period much earlier than the Meiji era. The style of the casting visible in the portion of it I have been able to see suggests the Nara period or earlier, which would place it more than 1,000 years before Mr. Pemberton brought it to Northumberland. I know this because I have seen the edge of it, through the gap in the sealed room's door that was left when the door frame warped in its last winter. I have seen the edge of it, and I have seen what the room looks like around it, and I have seen enough to know what my father's family would have known when they heard the word Kagami spoken in connection with a mirror of this age and this kind. My father's family are Buddhist, as the samurai class was largely Buddhist for the centuries of the domain system. But the Kagami is not Buddhist. The Kagami is older than Buddhism in Japan. The Kagami is Shinto, and it is one of the three sacred treasures of the Shinto tradition: the mirror, the sword, the jewel. And while most Kagami that exist in the world are symbolic representations of the sacred tradition, made in the image of the original, there are mirrors whose age and whose specific history make them something more than symbolic. My grandmother, who was a woman of serious religious knowledge, told me about these mirrors when I was a child. She told me what they did. She told me that a true Kagami does not show you what is in front of it. She told me that a Kagami shows you what is real, which is a different thing. That what is real includes what was and what will be, all of it at once, in the way that the divine perspective includes all moments simultaneously, because from the divine perspective time is not a sequence but a terrain, and the mirror is the instrument through which that terrain becomes visible, if you are standing in front of it in the right conditions. She told me that this is why the Kagami is sacred. She also told me that this is why the Kagami is dangerous. I believe the mirror in the sealed room is a true Kagami. I believe this because of what has been happening to me in this house since October of last year, which I will describe in the documents that follow this one, and which has made me understand why my grandmother spoke of these objects with care. The sealed room is at the end of the western corridor. The door is behind the false panel in the paneling. I do not know how Mr. Pemberton sealed it. I have not been able to open the door from the corridor side because it is not a door in the ordinary sense. It has been built into the wall, not hinged in the conventional way, and I do not know the mechanism. I know the room is there because of the dimensions of the house, which do not add up, which I checked when I first became curious and which I have checked many times since. The room is there, and the mirror is in the room, and the mirror has been in the room for 35 years since Mr. Pemberton came back from Japan and built the house around it. I do not believe this was his intention. I believe he brought the mirror because he wanted to own it, the way he wanted to own everything Japanese that he encountered, without understanding what he had. I believe the house was built where it was built because the mirror preferred this land, and that the western wing was built the way it was built because the mirror preferred this orientation, and that the room at the end of the corridor was sealed, because at some point in the 35 years Mr. Pemberton spent alone with his collection, he understood that the mirror was not a decorative object. I believe the house is not Pemberton's house. I believe it is the mirror's house. I believe Pemberton built it for the mirror without knowing he was doing it, the way a dreaming man acts on the logic of the dream without understanding that he is dreaming. I am writing this down and I am putting it in this box, and I am putting the box in the space in the wall, and I am going to write more as I learn more. And I hope someone finds this who is capable of understanding it. I hope that person is you. Mara, September 16, 2026. After I read the first document, I sat on the floor of the corridor for a long time with my back against the paneling and the lacquer box in my lap. This is not a standard response to an archival find. I am recording it because I want to be accurate about my own behavior throughout this period, and accurate behavior includes sitting on the floor of a corridor for an indeterminate period, because you have just read something that you are having difficulty filing. The filing problem was not that I didn't believe her. That was the thing I kept coming back to, the thing I was examining most carefully about my own response. I have a scientific and professional training in the assessment of historical documents, and I know the criteria for authenticity, and I know the difference between a genuine period document and something produced later to look like one. The documents in the lacquer box are genuine. The paper, the ink, the formulation of the handwriting, the patina of the lacquer box itself, the smell of the space behind the panel, everything is consistent with an 1887 origin. This is not a hoax, and it is not a discovery from a later period than it claims. So the filing problem was not credibility. The filing problem was what she described, which did not fit in any existing file I had. I am a postgraduate student in architectural history. I believe in measurement and documentation and the material evidence of the past. I am not, by temperament or by training, the person who accepts without examination the idea that a Japanese ritual mirror sealed in a Victorian house in Northumberland has been doing something to the house's relationship with time for 139 years. I am not that person. I am also, as of the 16th of September, the person who has confirmed by 3 independent measurements that the western wing's upper floor contains approximately 10 to 12 feet of linear space that does not appear on any plan, and who has found, behind a false panel in the corridor wall, a sealed access to a room that the trust survey does not mention, and who has made enough preliminary observations through the gap at the warped door frame to confirm that there is a large circular bronze object set into the room's far wall that is not in any inventory of the house's contents. I reported the discovery to the Trust's regional property manager on September 14th. I sent photographs of the lacquer box and the documents. I am waiting to hear what the Trust wants to do about the room. While I wait, I am reading the remaining documents. The second document is shorter than the first. Keiko wrote it, based on the date at its heading, 3 weeks after the first, in early November of 1887. It describes the first time she saw what she calls in the document the other moment, and what I have been calling, in my own notes since I read it, the fold. She writes, "I was in the drawing room in the evening, doing needlework at the table by the east window. The drawing room at Yomiten Hall has 3 windows on the eastern aspect. I was at the middle window. I had my needlework in my hands and I was not thinking about anything specific, and I looked up from the needlework." She writes, "There was a woman at the table. She was sitting across the table from me, at the end of the table with something in front of her that I did not immediately recognize. A flat object, thinner than a book, with a surface that produced its own light, a cold bluish light, the light of the moon on water but smaller and contained. She was looking at this object. She had not seen me. She was perhaps a few years older than me, perhaps 25, with dark skin and natural hair arranged in a way I had not seen before, practical, close to the head. She was wearing clothing that I did not recognize in style or in material. She was entirely present in the room, not transparent, not the quality of a ghost as I have heard them described. Solid, specific. She moved when she moved the way a real person moves, with the specific small adjustments of a real body in a real chair." She writes, "I said something. I do not remember what I said. She looked up." She writes, "She looked up and she saw me. And the expression on her face was the expression of someone seeing something they were not prepared for, and who is attempting to respond to it with more composure than is entirely available to them in the moment. I understood this expression because I have worn it many times in this house." She looked at me for approximately, and here Keiko has written a duration in Japanese characters rather than English, which I cannot read but which I have asked a colleague to translate, who has told me it means the length of time it takes to breathe in and then breathe out very slowly. And then she was not there. She writes, "I do not believe I was imagining her. I am not a woman who imagines things. My grandmother was a woman who saw things that other people did not see, and she told me that the difference between imagining and seeing was that imagining produces a vagueness and seeing produces a specificity, that when you see something real, even something that is not supposed to be real, it has the quality of a specific thing, with particular details that your imagination would not have assembled because your imagination would not have known to assemble them. The woman I saw in the drawing room had specific details. The object that produced its own light had specific details. The light of the house when she was visible was different from the light of the house when she was not. She was from somewhere else in time. I believe she was from after my time, from a time when the house was empty of me and full of someone else. And I believe the mirror is why I saw her." She writes, "I went to the mirror room the following morning, to the gap in the warped frame, and I looked through the gap at the edge of the mirror. The mirror's surface was dark, as it always is when I look at it through the gap. But there was something different at the very edge of the mirror, a quality at the rim of it that I am going to describe as warmth, a faint amber warmth, as if the metal itself were slightly warmer than the air around it. This is not something I had seen before. I believe the mirror was doing something. I believe it had done something the previous evening, and the warmth was what remained of the doing. That document ends there. I read it sitting in the drawing room on the morning of the 17th of September, at the table by the east window, which is where Keiko was sitting in 1887, when she saw the woman with the cold bluish light from the thin object in front of her. I had my laptop open on the table in front of me. The laptop was what she saw. She saw me. I sat with this for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and I opened my survey notes and I worked until lunchtime, because working was what I had, and because Keiko, I was already thinking of her by her given name, which is not standard archival practice, and which I noted as a deviation from standard practice, and which I continued anyway. Because Keiko had sat at this same table with her needlework in 1887 and had not run from what she saw, and I was not going to be worse at this than a 19-year-old woman in 1887 who was alone in a foreign country had been. At 11:30, I looked up from my laptop. Keiko, 19th November, 1887. I have found the mechanism of the sealed room door. I am writing this quickly because I am not certain of the time available. The door from the corridor into the sealed room does not open from the corridor side by any conventional means. I have understood this for some time. What I did not understand until this morning was that it opens from the room side. This means that there is another way into the room. I found the other way by doing what I was taught to do when I was looking for something I could not see directly, which is to look at what is around the thing rather than at the thing itself. Mr. Pemberton built this house. He sealed the room. He sealed it from the inside, which means he left the room voluntarily and sealed it behind him and never returned, or he sealed it involuntarily, which is to say the room sealed itself with him outside it. I believe the second of these things is true. I believe Mr. Pemberton tried to enter the room at some point in the construction of the house, or shortly after, and the room did not permit him to enter, and he built the false panel over the corridor entrance and did not speak of it again. I believe this because of how I found the other entrance. I found it because the mirror showed it to me. I had been looking at the mirror through the gap for some months at this point, and I had learned that the mirror was not always the same when I looked at it. It was not always reflective. Sometimes the surface was completely dark as the room around it, and sometimes it had the quality I described in the previous document, the warmth at the edge, the sense of something active in the metal. And occasionally, 3 times in 3 months, the surface had a quality of reflection that was not a reflection of me looking through the gap. It reflected something else, something in the room that I could not see directly. I believe it was reflecting the door. Or rather, it was reflecting the door as it appeared from the other side, from inside the room, which meant it was showing me something I could not see from my position, but that it could see from its position, which was the center of the room. The 3rd time this happened, I looked very carefully at what the mirror was showing, and I saw a door, not the corridor door, a different door, set into the south wall of the sealed room, which in terms of the house's geography would be the wall that adjoins the locked room at the end of the south passage on the upper floor. A door from the south passage into the sealed room, hidden as the corridor door is hidden, behind a panel from the south passage side. I went to the south passage this morning. I found the panel. I opened it. I am in the anteroom now, the small space between the panel and the door into the sealed room itself. The door into the sealed room is before me. It is not locked. It is simply a door. I am going to open it. I am writing this first because I want the record to be complete. I want whoever finds the documents in the lacquer box to know that I found the room and that I went into it with intention, not by accident, not in ignorance. I went in knowing what was there. My grandmother told me about the Kagami, and I have been in this house for 16 months, and I know what the house is, and I know what the mirror is. I am putting this document in the box with the others. I will write another document after I have been in the room, if I am able to write. One more thing before I go in. The woman from the other moment, I have seen her 4 more times since the drawing room in October. She is always in the house, always working at something, the flat object that produces its own light, and also carrying instruments I do not recognize but that appear to be measuring instruments. She is measuring the house. She has been measuring the rooms and the corridor, and she is looking for the same thing I found. She has almost found the panel in the corridor 3 times. I am going to leave the corridor panel easier to find before I go into the room. She needs to find the documents. I need her to find the documents. She will find this one last. I am putting it at the bottom of the box. I am putting it here so she knows I went in knowing. I went in knowing and with intention and without fear, which is the correct way to enter a place of significance. I am Fujiwara Keiko of the Satsuma domain. I am 19 years old. I am opening the door. Mara, September 22, 2026. I found the South Passage panel on the 20th of September. I found it because I was in the South Passage measuring, as Keiko said I was, and because the panel resonated the same way the corridor panel had resonated, and I pushed it, and it opened, and behind it was the anteroom, and behind the anteroom was the door. I did not open the door immediately. I stood in the anteroom for approximately 20 minutes. I am telling you this because I think the 20 minutes matters, because what I was doing in those 20 minutes was reading the final document in the lacquer box. The one Keiko had put at the bottom, the one that says I went in knowing. I had already read the other 6 documents by this point. The final document is the one I have just reproduced for you. I stood in the anteroom and I read it and I read it again, and then I stood there for the remaining time. I opened the door. The room was cold and dark. I had a torch and I used it. The room was approximately 12 feet by 14 feet, with a ceiling height consistent with the upper floor's other rooms, which is 11 feet. The walls were plain plaster, unpainted with no decorative treatment. The floor was bare boards, very dusty. There was nothing in the room except the mirror. It was in the center of the far wall, which is the north wall, set directly into the plaster, which had been applied around it specifically, carefully, with the skill of a craftsman who had been given a specific brief and had executed it to a high standard. The mirror was exactly as Keiko had described from the gap in the door frame, circular, approximately 2 feet in diameter, the surface very dark with age, the back visible at the edges of the plaster surround, the relief decoration of the phoenix and peony motif, exactly as I would have expected for a mirror of the Nara period or earlier. It was mounted at a height of approximately 5 feet from the floor, which is the height at which a person of average height stands with their face level with the center of the disc. The surface of the mirror was dark when I came in. I stood in front of it with the torch and I looked at it, and it showed me the room in the torch's light, which was my reflection and the room behind me and nothing else. I stood there for a long time. The Trust's regional manager had called me that morning to tell me that they were sending a conservator to assess the mirror on the 28th of September. He said it was an extraordinary find, that the mirror appeared from my photographs to be of significant historical and cultural importance, that they would need to determine its provenance and assess its condition before any decisions could be made about its future. He said this with the careful professionalism of a man managing a very valuable discovery on behalf of a public institution. And I said yes, absolutely. And I hung up, and I went to the South Passage. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. Then the surface changed. I am going to describe this as plainly as I am able, which is what Keiko did in her documents, the plain and specific description of someone who is not going to embellish, because the embellishment would reduce rather than increase the truth of it. The surface of the mirror, which had been showing me the room behind me in the torch's light, showed me something else. The room behind me in the mirror's surface was not the room I was standing in. It was the same room, same dimensions, same north wall, same mirror in the same position, but the room in the mirror was not dusty, was not dark, was furnished. There was a small desk against the east wall with a lacquer writing box on it. There was a low cushion on the floor in front of the mirror. The light in the room in the mirror was not my torch's light. It was amber, lamplight, the specific quality of oil lamp light in an enclosed room. And in front of the mirror, in the mirror's surface, in the room that was the same room but differently in time, sitting on the low cushion, sitting with her hands flat on her knees, sitting with the upright posture of someone who has been trained to sit with the full weight of their attention available and directed, was a young woman in a dark kimono. She was looking at the mirror. She was looking at the mirror from her side of it, which meant she was looking at me from her side of it, which meant we were looking at each other through the surface of the mirror across 139 years, and her face, which was specific and particular and completely real in the way Keiko had described, the quality of seeing rather than imagining, the specificity rather than the vagueness. Her face had an expression I recognized without having met her, without having any basis for recognition, except the 7 documents in the lacquer box, and the 16 months she had spent in this house looking for what I was looking at. She was relieved. She was relieved, and underneath the relief she was something else, something I took another full minute to identify, standing in front of the mirror with the torch in my hand and my measuring notebook in my pocket, and all the ordinary professional equipment of the person I was before I opened the door. She was satisfied. She had the satisfaction of someone who made a plan and the plan worked, who trusted the house to bring the right person and the right person came, who put the documents in the lacquer box in the right place and the right person found them. She kept her hands on her knees and she looked at me, and she was 19 years old in 1887, and I was 24 years old in 2026, and the mirror was between us, and the mirror was not a barrier but a window, the thing that shows what is real, which is both of us, both moments, both sets of hands and both faces looking at each other through the bronze surface across all of the years that were between us. I said this aloud in the cold, empty room with the torch and the notebook and the dust on the floor around me. I said, I found them. I found everything. Her expression did not change, because she could not hear me. Or perhaps she could not hear me the way I could see her, the mirror working differently in that direction. Or perhaps the words were not the thing she needed to hear, because the thing she needed to see was simply me, standing in front of the mirror in front of the sealed room door, having come through the south passage, having found the panel, having read the documents, having done what she made it possible to do. I said, I'm going to make sure everyone knows, the trust, the conservator, a Japanese cultural institution. I'll find the right one. I'll find out where the mirror came from and I'll make sure it goes back. I don't know if she heard any of that, but she looked at me for what Keiko would have measured as the length of a slow and intentional breath, and then she turned her head, very slightly, toward the door of the room on her side, the south wall door, the one that led to the anteroom, the one she had opened on the 19th of November 1887 knowing what she was going into, and she looked at the door. And then she looked back at me, and she nodded once, and the surface of the mirror went dark. Mara, October 3, 2026, the conservator came on the 28th of September as scheduled. Her name was Dr. Yashiko Tanaka, which was not something the trust had mentioned when they told me a conservator was coming, but which, when I met her in the driveway of Yomiten Hall, felt so completely correct that I stood looking at her for a moment in a way that she noticed and was professionally patient about. She had the documents from Keiko with her when she came. I had scanned and sent copies to the trust, and the trust had sent copies to her in advance. She had read them 3 times on the train from London, she told me. She asked me to take her to the room immediately before any other part of the assessment, before photographs or measurements or any of the documentation protocols. She said, I need to see the mirror first. Everything else comes after. We went to the south passage. We went through the panel, through the anteroom, through the door. She stood in front of the mirror with the kind of stillness I had seen in Keiko's posture in the mirror's surface, the stillness of someone who knows how to bring their full attention to a single point, and she looked at the mirror for a long time in silence. Then she said in English, because we had been speaking English, and then she stopped and began again in Japanese. I do not speak Japanese. I waited. She was quiet for several more minutes. Then she turned to me and she said, "I know what this is. I know where it came from." She said the name of a shrine in Nara Prefecture, which is an ancient city in Japan, one of the oldest cities, which had been the imperial capital in the 8th century, which is consistent with a Nara period mirror. She said the mirror had been missing from the shrine's records since the 1860s, which was when Arthur Pemberton was in Japan, which was when the trading company was operating in the ports that had been opened to Western commerce by the Treaty of 1858. She said the shrine had a record of its absence and a tradition about what the absence meant, and that she had read about this tradition in her graduate studies and had thought it was only a tradition. The way you think things are only traditions until you are standing in front of the evidence that they are not. I asked her what the tradition said. She said, "The tradition says that the mirror does not stay where it does not belong, that it will arrange to be returned, that it has patience in quantities that are not human quantities, and that it uses what is available to it, the house, the people in the house, the ones who come to the house who are capable of understanding what they find, and that it does not force anything. It simply creates the conditions. It lets the right people find each other. It lets the right people understand." I thought about Keiko in the mirror. I thought about the relief on her face. I said, "How long has the mirror been in this room?" Dr. Tanaka said, "Since Pemberton built the house around it in 1854, 172 years. I said, "Is it still doing it?" The folding, the showing people across time. She looked at the mirror. The surface was dark and still and gave nothing away, the way it had been dark and still when I first came into the room before it showed me Keiko. She said, "I don't know. I think it does what it needs to do. When there is something it needs to show, it shows it. When there is nothing left to show, perhaps it simply is what it is, which is a very old mirror that should go home." She said, "I think what it needed to show has been shown. I think it brought you here. I think it brought the girl in 1887. I think it used both of you to do what needed to be done, and now what needs to be done is for someone from the shrine to come and assess whether it can be safely moved and to arrange its return." She took out her phone and she made a call in Japanese. I stood in the cold room with the dark mirror and I waited. I am writing this on the 3rd of October. The conservator is gone. The trust is in conversation with the Japanese Agency for Cultural Affairs and with the shrine in Nara. The mirror has not shown me anything since September the 20th. The surface has been dark every time I have checked, which I have done every day, and the room is cold and quiet and holds nothing but the dust on the floor and the mirror in the wall and the plaster that Pemberton built around it in 1854, which will need to be carefully removed by people who know what they are doing. I am finishing my survey of the house. The other rooms, the catalogued ones, the rooms in the trust's 207 pages. I am measuring and recording and doing the work I came here to do, and the work is good work and I am glad to be doing it. And in the evenings I read Keiko's documents again, which I have printed and which I keep on the table in the drawing room by the east window, at the same table where she sat with her needlework in October of 1887 and looked up and saw me. I have found a photograph of her, which came from the Trust's archive of Pemberton's papers, which the Trust had never fully catalogued. It is a formal portrait photograph in the Victorian manner, stiff, posed, the subject arranged rather than at ease, but with a specific quality that the arrangement does not entirely suppress. She is wearing a silk kimono in a Western photographer's studio, which was a particular kind of awkwardness that she carries without apology, without trying to resolve it into one thing or the other. She is looking directly at the lens with the directness of someone who has been told to look at the lens, and who is doing it and who is also, clearly, looking at something else entirely. Looking past the lens, past the studio, past the moment of the photograph, toward something further away that she has already decided about. She is 19 years old in the photograph. The photograph is dated November 1887, the same month she wrote the final document, the same month she opened the door. She went into the room knowing. She said so. She said she went in with intention and without fear. The historical record shows that she returned to Japan in the spring of 1888, having completed the year of her arrangement with Pemberton, and that she married a man of the Meiji civil service in 1890 and lived in Tokyo until her death in 1943, at the age of 84. She had 4 children. She is survived by grandchildren and great-grandchildren, some of whom are still living. The trust has put me in touch with her great-granddaughter, a woman in Kyoto whose name I have but whose privacy I will not include in this account. She knows about the documents. The trust contacted her before contacting me, which I think is the correct order. She was not surprised, which told me something. She said, through a translator, that there was a family story, that Keiko had told her children something, not everything but something, about the house in England with the mirror in the wall, and that one of the things she had told them was this, that she had seen a woman in the house from another time, a woman who was looking for something, and that she had helped the woman find it, that she had made sure the woman would be able to find it. The great-granddaughter said. She told her children that the woman she saw was kind. She could see it. She said she could tell from across all that distance, from the other side of the mirror, that the woman who would find her documents was a kind person, and that this was how she knew it was going to be all right. I read this message 3 times sitting in the drawing room by the east window at the table with her documents in front of me, and then I put my head down on my arms, and I stayed there for a while, which is not standard archival practice, and which I am recording because accuracy matters and this happened. She thought I was kind. She could see it. She used everything available to her, the house, the mirror, the lacquer box, the 7 documents, the corridor panel she made easier to find. She used all of it to find the right person, and she thought the right person was kind and she was not afraid, and she went through the door. I am going to make sure the mirror goes home. I am going to make sure the record of what Keiko found and what she understood and what she did is preserved correctly, with her name on it. Fujiwara Keiko, 19 years old, Satsuma domain, who came to a house in Northumberland in 1886 and found something in the walls that the house's owner didn't understand and spent 16 months understanding it, and then walked through the door to face it because she was samurai class and she didn't do things any other way. I am going to make sure people know her name. I am Mara Osei. I am 24 years old. I came to Yomiten Hall to measure the walls and I found her inside them, and I am going to do everything she left the documents for, and then the mirror is going home, and that is what happens next. That is what the house kept between us. That is the whole of it.